hitting me today right out that door. And not only is the sun hitting me, it's the
water meter.
it's the septic tank.
That's the septic tank's there, and you got a little over there.
Yeah.
So
What do you? Okay.
I'm gonna look at the water meter and see if it's running water into the septic tank. If we got a busted line or something, if it is, we'll have to call like that water.
So all of that reflection from shiny ponding water near the septic tank. Good old country.
And they're blinded. Or is it? There's not one on the door, is there?
What's that? A blind? There's no blind on the door. But I think I look angelic almost. All right, so we're gonna go to our Hebrew, of course, and we're gonna look at the Second Commandment a little bit in more detail, because for the past week I've just been doing all 3 weeks of prep for the First Commandment. About you can't get started with an orderly worldview if you don't have God. And if you replace God with any other worldview, you just cycle off into insanity. You can't account for the way the world is without a God who created it. And of course, the Bible has as a major theme God the Creator. And it's not like it's just in Genesis. I mean, it's the creative power of God and his control over the universe is a constant refrain of his praise and his glory. And you just look at the heavens and consider everything about the magnificence of God's handiwork. So it's thematic throughout the Bible. And even when you get to the book of Romans, there's clearly a condemnation on people who would rather worship the creation rather than the creator. Because not everything, but there are things that are plainly known about God by looking at the creation. And of course, we know you can't get to salvation by looking at the creation, but you certainly understand order, magnitude, power, control, and also accompanying, I would say, those grand themes are the other things about our personal interrelationship. We need logic, we need love, we need justice, we need dignity. And those aren't necessarily the product of nature, creation, but it comes with the package of God being the author of everything. Because as we will veer into it, God's name is on everything, and it is somehow a reflection of his character and his ways. I think that's kind of in the ballpark. So what I wanted to do was to look at the Hebrew of Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. Make sure I'm at this right starting point. There it is. The word lo again in the Hebrew is a negation, don't do something. In the Greek, there would be the u or the uk, which would be a negation of what you weren't supposed to do. It just sort of prepares you for the don't do this, don't be like this. And he says, you shall not bow down to them. And he's given a list of things in the heavens or things under the water. You don't bow down to that which is carved and created. Because, again, a favorite expression of mine, and I learned it a long time ago, is that we're supposed to worship the correct God correctly. And this is what the Second Commandment is really getting to. We haven't learned much about who God is from these commandments, except for he's a redeeming God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the house of slavery, out of Mitzrayim, and you shall not have any other gods before me. So we know something about him is that he is covenanting with the people, and he's saying, this is the way our program's going to run. You're not going to be like the other nations. And, you dig up the Egyptian artwork and their views of the underworld, and you've got people with dog heads and falcon heads, and
Cats,
you go to the Persian empires and you have those, what are those things called? Those
Persian cats.
seraphim.
Cherubs.
They're the creatures with all different, like lion paws and winged griffins. What are those things called? Gryffindor. Well, anyway, all of these ancient civilizations in Persia and around have all of these depictions of in their palaces and in their places of worship. And God says, you're not going to be like that. This brings us to a very interesting discussion about the God who does not want to be known by any depiction. Yeah.
In addition, in Persia, and I'm surprised it doesn't mention this in the Ten Commandments because it's so much everywhere else in the Old Testament. The children of Israel were constantly being reminded not to worship the sun and moon and stars.
Very
And
good.
that was the big deal in Persia.
Yes.
And so, although people, of course, did not make the sun, moon, and stars, it was worship of God's creation. And I think that's what we have now in this country is a worship of the creation because of the nature worship that is going on that is so prevalent because everybody needs something to worship.
It's true. We are born worshipers. There is always something that's most important to our heart and our thoughts, and something that's continually possessing our energies as far as our thought life, be it a sports team or an illicit lifestyle or people who are given over to addictions. And boy, trying to fight your way out of that without the Spirit's work is a difficult thing. You end up becoming the thing you worship. And going back to sort of the historical narrative of some of those ancient civilizations, they really knew nature well. They knew the progress of the seasons and the stars. Those guys were watching. And of course, they came up with their own ideas about birth and rebirth and seasons. And that really did infiltrate their religious worldview. They were careful observers.
It shows you that they had a law written on their hearts. When you think about, because they turn the incorruptible God into something like into corruptible man.
Yeah.
So the law was there written on their hearts, but they just polluted it and was like, let's change it and make it like this.
You just ticked off a little, you pop little files in my brain. They open up. And a few people I've heard this as far as their testimony of coming to Christ is people who study literature, and you think, well, no, you really need to get into the apologetics of science and philosophy. But there's been a few former atheists who were so well versed in ancient literature and just doing their comparison of what other civilizations saw as literature and then compared it to the Bible, saw a whole different worldview going on, and a lot of things that they picked up in shadow and in type. I know that's exclusively a reference to Jesus Christ, but people could study even other cultures and you could still get snippets of what the true God was like.
Well, they have their view of the divine. Of course, it is a view that's diametrically opposed to the true divine.
Right. But there's always enough hints of what we know to be right and true. All the stories are heroic people doing things that reveal, the dignity of man, but oftentimes it ends up being the worship of man and not thanksgiving to God. Well, anyway, we're not supposed to bow or serve, two exclusive words of worship. And then there's the word key. I remember this being on my flashcard and in my Hebrew class, and I always had to remember I've got a key for that. Whenever I'd see the kaf and the yod, I knew that was the word for. So here's a very interesting set of words that come up. I, Anoki, Yahweh, the divine name that we don't say, Adonai, Elohika, El. You got 4 words of God using to describe himself. And then the English translation puts in brackets the word am, so it kind of makes sense to us in the English. But you've got right here 3 words that are all speaking about divinity. Yahweh, Elohika, El. I am Jehovah, I am Adonai, your God, and I, as a God, I am jealous, Kana. And this is kind of an interesting thing. Again, I don't get any residuals from talking about this Bible Hub interlinear. But so you come up to this word Kana, which means God is jealous. We'll talk about that in a minute. But just to let you know the age we live in and how well you can become versed in ancient languages without even going to seminary anymore. You'd want to have someone who really knows the language guide and direct you. Oh, okay. So anyways, you hit a link and you see that this specifically is used 6 times. That's the word jealousy. And then, of course, you see it listed here in Exodus, Deuteronomy, different variations of the word that get used in other occasions that show you the expansion of that word. And we all have word. We know that in the English language, there's derivatives of certain words. We can make up several different words out of the root of a particular word. So you can do some great cross-referencing with this little interlinear here.
Is that the one on Bible Hub that you were telling me about last night?
So this question is interesting because this is kind of the first reference to God being jealous or zealous. And I asked the question of myself, did anyone ever think that the idol that they created was ever jealous? It's just like an interesting trait to refer to yourself as being zealous about your place in the world. And when someone makes an idol, would they ever attribute jealousy or zealousness to the idol if they did not actually do what they were supposed to do for the idol? If they didn't put the egg drop soup in front of it or whatever, did the idol get mad? Was the idol offended? And so here within this section of the Decalogue, we have God already beginning to describe who he is, but not by physical characteristics. It is insight into personal dignity and worth. I am a zealous God. I protect what belongs to me, and I protect the honor of my name.
I don't share my honor.
Right. So it's just interesting. A thought I can't answer right now. Would any of the other Buddhas or whomever, would they ever be jealous of you or zealous for their worship? I do know this, having said that, is that we never can ever satisfy our own idols. They will never bring salvation to us, and they will never let us go. They are kind of demanding in that respect. But it talks about him visiting the iniquity of the fathers and on to their sons, to the 3rd and 4th generations. And there isn't the word generation there, but it is basically saying I'm visiting to the 3rds and the 4ths. So is everything okay over there?
Yes.
Somebody didn't recognize.
Probably another worker out there.
Yeah. Okay.
So here's a reference to God's personal honor and saying that to not treat him rightly is to be a sinner. That's what iniquity is. And that if you did not train your children right, there would be ramifications for it, that your children would reap because of your disobedience.
Things do perpetuate themselves.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. That's why discipleship is such a huge and important aspect of the Christian life. I see myself not as a father who's trying to advance my last name in the world. I didn't have kids so that the world would know more of my family. As a
They do
Christian,
know more of your family. You got 5 kids.
Yeah. I've got those kids so that I could disciple them and train them in the ways of Jesus Christ, and so that they would love his kingdom and that their family would know the blessings of that. So if you don't recognize that God cares about his name, then he's going to visit the things that you do that don't honor him, and he's going to remove your name, basically.
But isn't it interesting to look at that verse and look at it in comparison with Ezekiel 18:4?
Yeah, you brought that up last time.
Where Ezekiel the prophet's saying, was he the prophet or the Lord speak? It says, "The soul that sins shall die."
Mm-hmm.
You cannot. He says, "I'm visiting the." How's he put it? Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. So it's an interesting contrast or comparison. The sin being perpetuated in their line, and yet you will answer for your own sin.
Yeah.
Still.
Yes. The promise, the reverse of iniquity, is the promise of, and here you can see the yim at the end of the word, the yod. Why did I'm switching into Greek. Yod, what's the M again? Oh, embarrassing. Well, we'll find out. Will I? No, that's not the right one. I guess I got rid of it. Where were we? But anyways, the yim, making them plural, of those who hate me. There are a group of people who despise the Lord and his ways, and they will be visited with God's retribution. But showing mercy, and there's your word, chesed. And it's called mercy here, but I really liked what happened with the Net Bible. You've got a question?
I need to interrupt you a second.
Yeah.
You don't have any water,
Okay.
so try not to use that.
Someone's going to come tomorrow and fix it?
Might come, we cut it off, it's
Okay.
a water leak, it busted somewhere under the lake.
All right.
But we got the water cut off.
Okay.
And he's gonna try to fix it tomorrow, but by Sunday, so.
Okay.
There'll be nobody here anyway, but.
Right.
Busted water leak, that probably been running a while, because there's water everywhere.
I know, I saw
Did
that.
you notice it when you got here?
I did, and I thought, wow, it really rained. And then I looked at it later this evening
Well,
when,
you got terrible rain at your house.
yeah,
Did you see where it washed through
yeah,
there?
we had a lot of rain there too.
Sorry to interrupt.
All right, nice to meet you, Ryan.
Sir.
So the Net Bible, which is another resource that I look at, they took the word mercy and they turned it to the word, where is it?
Covenant faithfulness is what it says.
That's exactly what I'm trying to look for. But oh, there it is. Yeah. They turned it to covenant faithfulness. So chesed, you know what? When you go and you learn about love in the New Testament, what is the Greek word for love? That's the love that describes God and the kind of love that God has, agape, right? And you learn that over and over again. You know, in the New Testament, there's phileo, and then there's storge, which is not in the Greek, but it is a Greek word. It's not in the Bible. What's the other word for love?
Eros.
Huh? Eros. That's it.
Philo?
Yeah. Phileo.
Phileo.
So there are different types of love. Agape being the highest form of love, the love that most describes God, the type of love he has, the sacrificial, self-serving, not self-serving, but serving of other people type of love. Well, this is sort of the agape of the Old Testament, chesed. It's the ultimate commitment of God in a relationship that this particular translation of the Bible would call it God, I'm showing covenant faithfulness. So again, what's kind of neat about this Bible Hub interlinear is you can click on, and what I'm actually clicking on is on the transliteration of these letters right here. Chesed. All right. Oh, one other last thing about Hebrew is you'll find that almost every Hebrew word is a 3-letter word at its core, at its root, at its base. Not all of them, obviously, because there's, conjunctions and things like that. But so many of the Hebrew words are just 3 letters. And depending on the vowel marking, you could get a completely different word out of it. But okay, so here you go. So let's see how important this word is, chesed. And it occurs 66 times in that particular expression and that verbal expression. But then look at the column at the right and see every other aspect of how chesed is used throughout the Bible. So this is a topic that really relates to, and it's most oftentimes translated into or interpreted as loving kindness. That's like the phrase for chesed. Here it's in this version, it was mercy. And this is not a version. This is just trying to be a word for word translation. But mercy and loving kindness. I noticed that word showed up here in Micah 6:8, a verse that many of us have memorized and even sing a little song to it. Or is it get down there? Micah 6:8. I'm trying. That's how many times chesed is used. He has shown me, O man, what the Lord has required of me. But to love mercy is how we, where did it go? To love mercy is how I know it as a song. And to walk humbly, to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly. But that's really the word chesed. And I guess maybe if the translators from the Net Bible, they would say to love covenant faithfulness. But that's a specific and a unique reference to the type of love of God that is very powerful, and it is connected with covenant faithfulness. So God is going to show covenant faithfulness to 1,000 of those who love me and keep my commandments. And we were talking about those numbers, how specific 3rd and 4th generation is. But when we come to the verses that say 1,000 days unto the Lord is, or he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, we don't think that he stops at hill 1001. It's a reference. It's like a reference for eternal, comprehensive,
Like millennium.
Very good. It's not necessarily a literal number, cardinal number. It's a reference to the expanse and the extent of God's love. It goes forever.
Well, I've noticed something about this contrast that you're talking about in verses 5 and 6.
Good.
It's that the wickedness that gets passed along is the wickedness of people. But the mercy that gets passed along is the mercy of God.
Nice.
And the wickedness of people just goes along a few
Hopefully.
This is the way it's worded. But the mercy of God is
Yeah, I like that.
It's a contrast there that
Very
makes
much
a
so.
great big difference.
And it's a great observation. You definitely see, I used the word juxtaposition in the sermon, but I don't think I ever outlined what the juxtaposition was. But yeah, there is definitely an either and situation going on here. But here we're learning something about the God who doesn't want to be depicted by any imaginary object to view, but he's giving you qualities and traits of what he will do. He's a God who takes offense, but he's a God who's really ready to bless. And then we come to this really wonderful word, mitzvote. If you look at these first letters here, mitzvot, in a Hebrew house, you will walk to the front door and there will be a little, at an angle, a little piece of metal, and it has Hebrew's letters on it, and they call it the mitzvot. And that's supposed to be a representation of the 10 Commandments. And so it would be at their door. And so they would either touch it or kiss it on their way in and out of the house, because that house will be living according to God's law. So the 10 Commandments would be a defining reality for them, and that's called the mitzvot. And that's Hebrew commandments. So I like the juxtaposition. I like essentially your reference here to the God who's ready to bless those who understand how he's defined, not by imagery, but by concepts such as faithfulness to his law, holiness, being set apart as being unique. And of course, we all know that passage in Colossians that talks about Jesus being the expressed image, the icon of God. Colossians 1:15, that, now our worship is directed at something material, something that has shape and form, but he is the express image of God. It's a very interesting contemplation to say, I'm a God who doesn't want to be depicted in any way, but yet I still send my son, and he will represent, he is the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And Jesus Christ now plays. I got to be careful how I use my words here, but Jesus Christ is God in the flesh incarnate and fulfilling the law of God that the Jewish people in covenant with him could not keep, so he could be the complete and redeeming God for a people to which he would extend all of his covenant blessings to 1,000 generations. But it's an interesting transition to take those concepts and meld them together.
It's why the Jews who are opposed to Christianity find that just so absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, abhorrent to them. I know. If you can get anyone saved in the Old Testament by complete obedience to the law, in Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, he would tick off how they were already abusing the law and misapplying it, and he would come back and say, no, this is what it's really about. You want to define adultery, you've been messing around. It's, even if you look lustfully at someone, that's, God considers that adultery. Jesus would raise the bar of Moses exponentially on the Sermon on the Mount, as far as if you're looking for salvation by your own righteousness. No, you've just carved a little image to yourself, and you found yourself as being fitting before God. So
and that he's not going after the law, but he's going after the perversion of the law.
Very good. Yeah.
He's not addressing the law directly. He's addressing how they have perverted the law.
Yeah.
Because he says, but I say.
Yeah. So in a sense, they were doing what the serpent did in the Garden of Eden. They took a command and let's give it a new twist. Yeah. Is that really, did you really hear that rightly? The reason why that can't be is because he doesn't like rivals. That's true. He doesn't like rivals. But we're not supposed to take it onto ourselves. We're not supposed to deify ourselves. And that's what perverting the law does. We make ourselves look so good and so right. So,
When you think about just going back down, because we've gone past the graven image. A lot of people have no problem with Jesus pictures.
I didn't for the majority of my life.
I didn't either. And
there's so many depictions of cartoon Jesus.
You talked about the 2CV.
Yeah,
And
Second Commandment violation. Yeah. And, I didn't get into this, but if you want to look at artwork of Jesus and maybe get a little chuckle, and that's to look at the Latter-day Saints artwork. Because, man, those guys are the biggest, buffest, most ripped dudes you'd ever want to see. You flip through they're angels, like our MMA fighters. They're just rude. And when you consider the passage from Isaiah about there was nothing about him that would draw us to him, you would think maybe perhaps Jesus was maybe on the homely side. But it's not our place to make a depiction of him and say, this is what I think Jesus. No. We're a people of the word.
The best description I ever heard of Jesus, referring to the passage from Isaiah, is turn on the evening news when the cameras are moving about Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And you look at the average Jewish man walking down the street, unassuming. There's your picture of Jesus.
You wouldn't give him a second look.
Right.
Yeah.
But multitudes followed him.
Yeah.
This unassuming guy.
All right. So there's something in the Second Commandment that has consequences, and it is consequences related to how people train their children and raise their children. God is not a trifle. And then we get a little bit more of this in the next commandment, the third commandment, verse 7, Exodus 20. Lo, you shall not take the name, and here's the famous word Shem. Not the name of the person Shem that we know from Noah, but again, when we talk about this word Yahweh, that's the unpronounced name, the Jewish people prefer to say Hashem, the name. They won't say his name. It's either Hashem or Adonai. So you shall not take the name of your God in vain. And that's an interesting word here. La sha'a. Basically emptying the name of its rightful place, of its worth. We all know what vanity is, and that's when you think of yourself more than you ought. But there's this aspect of taking the Lord's name in vain is to cheapen it and to disregard its worth. Key for lo, I am not, negation. We'll hold a person, yea, nake, guiltless, and here's Yahweh again. So in the commandment that mentions not taking his name in vain, we see it referenced twice, the divine name. But he will not hold him guiltless who speaks his name in vain. It's like a double attribution. Don't hold my name in vain because I don't hold it, because I'm going to hold everyone in trouble who doesn't regard my name. So again, finding definition for the God who does not want to be depicted in any way. We hear about his honor, and he wants us to take more care about his name than other aspects of worship. Don't cheapen him. Don't deride him. Well, what happens at this? Go ahead.
I think it is offensive to God for us to make jokes about him. And that something happened at one, I can't remember what church I was sitting in when this happened, but a number of pastors walked in. It was one of those group congregation things. And one of the speakers turned around and looked at the rest of them. He said, well, the God Squad has arrived.
The God Squad.
Somehow that just didn't go down.
Yeah.
With me.
Yeah, we need to be sensitive about how we use the Lord's name. And I'm going to confess my sins. I've had a lifetime of, usually everyone associates this with foul language, or saying something, and I guess what are you doing when you do that? You're calling a curse upon God or calling a curse upon something. And you're expressing your dissatisfaction with the situation that you got to revile his name.
I always tell the atheists, you believe in God.
Yeah.
Because you take his name in vain all the time.
Right. And so when you think about God's name and the holiness of his name, and that we're supposed to call upon him and revere him and see him as the source of our existence, yeah, we do trivialize God's name. But what I thought would be appropriate at this point, and because it'll give us some good fruit of conversation, is how the Westminster Larger Catechism, we won't read the Larger Catechism in the church service, that'll take too long. But here's the Westminster Larger Catechism, question 112. What is required in the third commandment? You can look on this online. The third commandment requires that the name of God, his titles, attributes, ordinances, the word, sacraments, prayer, oaths, vows, lots, his works, and whatsoever else there is whereby he makes himself known, be holy and reverently used in thought, meditation, word, in writing, by an holy profession and answerable conversation, to the glory of God and the good of ourselves and others. So it's not just dropping a hammer on your foot and cussing. It's like, there are oaths, there are vows that we make that are made in his name. It even referenced lots there. Maybe they were still choosing elders by lots, I'm not sure. But all of God's work in our prayers, however God uses, whatever thing he uses to make himself known, we are not to treat it vainly. We're to see it as something that is an expression of his complete uniqueness and importance.
You said something good Sunday in class here. You said trivialize his name. And, because the Matthew 7:33 and 30 through 37 deals with the taking of oaths and dealing with the third commandment.
Yeah.
And he talked about, we cannot trivialize the name of God. And when we just loosely throw out his name like that, and in swear and vain talk, we literally are trivializing the God of all creation.
There's sort of the adventure of being a pastor and trying to realize what makes the best connection with a congregation so that they're more inclined to learn more, study more, engage more. And I've seen the pastors who are like complete deadpan, solid information, but just no enthusiasm for what they're doing. And then you get kind of me, who kind of sometimes gets a little excited about what he's talking about and raises his voice. And then there's the guys who are always crying. I try not to be that guy. And then there's like the nightclub guys. The nightclub guys who are like joking. And I mean, personally, that's kind of who I am. But it just doesn't seem right to just kind of do that the whole service long, to try to engage people in their relationship with the Lord. I do like, after kind of seeing all the different models that are out there, seeing the idea of reverence being an important quality in our worship services, that at the end of the day, no one is honored and glorified more than God. Because a lot of people go to a church because that band or that speaker or that coffee. I don't know.
So
There's
the
like-
coffee bar,
There's so many other things rather than
Yes.
those people there revere God's name and they're serious about it.
Or they go because the church is not too serious about God.
Right.
They're they don't walk away convicted.
Almost every modern piece you will get in the mail from a church that's just starting up. The words relevant are in the literature, and you can come here and be yourself.
And they
And
talk about
As
all
you
the
are.
ministries.
exactly. And I understand the idea of making sure people know that they're welcomed, but shouldn't we also be communicating that God matters more than you being in the pew? Maybe, I don't know. The whole focus on how the person is going to feel rather than how we should all corporately regard God isn't often advertised in our churches. So,
that was something that was very important when I was on staff at our previous church, is that we were not a friendly church. We were not welcoming
Yeah.
enough to folks visiting.
yeah, I don't want to be that either.
No, I don't either, but I'm looking back on it now.
Yeah.
I think we lost that reverence
In trying to be
in trying to be more,
sensitive to people.
right.
Definitely calls for balance.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Well, here the larger catechism goes on. What are the sins forbidden in the third commandment? You ready to write these all down? What are the sins forbidden in the third commandment? The sins forbidden in the third commandment are the not using God's name as is required, and the abuse of it in an ignorant, vain, irreverent, profane, superstitious, or wicked mentioning, or otherwise using his titles, attributes, ordinances, or works by blasphemy, perjury, all sinful cursings, oaths, vows, and lots, violating of our oaths and vows, if lawful, and fulfilling them if of things unlawful, murmuring and quarreling at, curious prying into, and misapplying of God's decrees and providences, misinterpreting, misapplying, or in any way perverting the word, or in any part of it, to profane jests, curious or unprofitable questions, vain janglings, or the maintaining of false doctrines, abusing it, the creatures, or anything contained under the name of God, to charms or sinful lusts and practices, the maligning, scorning, reviling, or any wise opposing of God's truth, grace, and ways, making profession of religion in hypocrisy or for sinister ends, being ashamed of it or ashamed to it by uncomfortable, unwise, unfruitful, and offensive walking or backsliding from it. It's kind of hard to read it with all the numbers in the middle, giving you scripture references. But any of that leap out at you as a way of violating this commandment?
We talked about this last night, that because we were talking about, the purpose, why the confessions were written and everything
Yeah.
at the time.
Mhm.
You definitely see a stab at Rome in that with the charms.
Oh, okay.
You
Yeah.
think about the rosaries and the crucifixes and all the other relics and everything that still walk into any cathedral today and your eyes fall to just as soon as you walk in the door.
Yeah, I don't know
Even
what
before you
vain
walk in the door.
janglings are.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there is sort of a interesting reference to the curious questions of things that, maybe those are the questions the kids are always asking that you can't answer, the unanswerable questions. But that is a pretty comprehensive list.
And it's in Old English.
Yeah. And then there's one final question. Every question has three questions about it besides what it is. What reasons are annexed to the third commandment? The reasons annexed to the third commandment in these words, the Lord thy God, and for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain, are because he is the Lord and our God. Therefore, his name is not to be profaned or any way abused by us, especially because he will be so far from acquitting and sparing the transgressors of this commandment, as that he will not suffer them to escape his righteous judgment, albeit many such escape the censures and punishments of men. So the thing that hits my mind immediately are how many people have made an entire career out of being vain as comedians and pressing every possible moral boundary, and have gone on using the name of the Lord in vain. And of course, none of those people are ever censured by anyone, but talk about someone who's heaping up for themselves more and more. Especially someone who's making a career out of it and thinking this has made me famous, this has made me wealthy. At the end of the day, God will have a different perspective on that you cheapened everything about what was holy and right and just. So
he is not mocked.
Well,
no.
I just happened to think about one of our political leaders a year or so ago was the suggestion was made that she hated someone. And she said she certainly did not, that she didn't have hatred in her heart, that the love of God was in her heart, and she presents herself as being a Christian. Or when we present ourselves as being one named for Christ
Yeah.
and behave in a way that dishonors him, that is a really bad way of dishonoring the name of
Yeah. Yeah. When I think of all the things that God puts his name on that have been maligned or ridiculed or used, I mean, is it fair for me to say that God has put his name on sexual intercourse in the sense that that's the way the world continues to propagate, and it is a gift of God, and it is given by him in a specific place for specific reasons, and how we have vainly, regarded that topic and have abused it in almost every social setting? I mean, God puts his name on churches. God puts his name on human dignity. All the places where God puts his name and we malign it, cheapen it, empty it of its goodness and reflection of who God is something that will be brought under punishment, under judgment. So
You'll pay for it yourself, or it was laid on Christ.
that's exactly right. Yeah. Jesus upon the cross, calling out upon the name of the Lord, why have you forsaken me? So, well, he was forsaking sinners at that point, of whom he was atoning, but only so that they could be brought into the fullness of his name. And that's an interesting other aspect about names, is that, the marriage illustration, again, if you get married, and you're the woman, you take on a new name, you take on a person's name. I know the culture does things differently, but you take on the name of the person of whom you're married. If you're the bride, and of course the church is the bride, Christ is the husband, and we take on his name, and we have that relationship with him, that chesed, loving, faithful, covenant faithfulness, and we share in all of his benefits and attributes. Why would you cheapen that by mocking it or disregarding its value? That's when people do feel jealous, is when their spouse runs off on them and doesn't hold reverent respect for the vows they've made. But anyway, that was all I had for this one particular passage. Any other concluding thoughts? Then we will go to the Lord in prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. We know that 10 Commandments have a significant place in the life of the believer, but we often tend to kind of blow past the first 4 commandments, get to the ones that, I don't know, they have a place because they're so connected to how we live everyday life. But this is also where we should live everyday life, having our thoughts and priorities in the right place, our spiritual thoughts and priorities in the right place, that we would always honor you, that we would seek to remove false notions of who you are so that we might worship you in spirit and in truth. We pray that you continue to bless your word in your church. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
You know, I think it got cooler in here
Maybe it's just getting cooler outside.
Yeah, the sun went down.
without the hot air blowing on us.
Yeah.